And hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Modern Witch. I am super excited to have somebody who I got to meet over the spring on the show, and they are responsible for a really important project that is about to drop. Namely, this amazing book, which is a biography about Scott Cunningham, who happens to be your brother. You happen to be Scott Cunningham's sister. And I have to tell you, Christine, I was amazed that you existed because the witchcraft world, we all love Scott so much, and he had such a huge impact on all of us, but his personal life was definitely not something that a lot of us knew about or even had access to or even knew how to, and then for all good purposes. I mean, all good reasons. As an author, I'm really glad people just can't, find my family. But at the same time, it's this thing where, I wanted to tell you when I met you, what makes this book such a treasure is that we treasure him as a community. We really do. And you're giving us insight into somebody who means the world. I mean, who helped shape so much of our religious and spiritual views. You're giving us something that, I mean, it really is, it's a treasure. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you for that. And I just want to start everything off with saying, again, thank you. I know that's a weird introduction to Christine, but Christine is actually, you're a writer. You write a lot of interesting stuff that I'm particularly excited about because I happen to like the subject matter that you do write on in your fiction work, specifically love and romance and things like that. That's very exciting. Your whole family, Christine, is pretty prolific when it comes to the writing. So before we talk about Scott and the book, let's talk about you and your family and just writing, because talk about a family of writers. How does all this work out with you and your family?
Well, it started with my dad, of course. Chet Cunningham did not do very well in his English classes at high school. And his teachers basically said, writing's not for you. And he went, oh, well, I'll show them. Took journalism in college at Pacific University in Forest Grove, where he grew up. And then the Korean War happened. So he went to war. And when he came back, he married my mom. And they went to New York because he got accepted into Columbia University as for his master's in journalism. And my mom worked in the library there at Columbia while they were in New York City. And my oldest brother, Greg, was born in New York, in Manhattan. So then, to make a long story short, they ended up coming to California. And by that time, my dad was writing for different companies. I mean, for a while, he wrote for the Methodist Church and their training pamphlets and stuff like that for the lay people, which I don't think I ever mentioned before. And then he came out to San Diego to write training films for the Navy. And he did that. And then when he wasn't working for that, he was writing his fiction on his own time. So by the time I came around, he was writing a lot. He was writing at night. And we fell asleep to the sound of his manual typewriter every single night. So that kind of, and he was home all the time. So we knew that writing was something that you could do and survive on, because he did. He raised a family of 5. I mean, he supported a family of 5. And so when that is your norm,
mm-hmm.
it doesn't seem outrageous.
Yeah, absolutely. Was he somebody who shared the stuff that he was writing? Like, did he share with you, like, oh, I just wrote this? Was he excited about stuff, or was it just mostly like he was grinding and just getting through the word count kind of stuff?
He was a grinder. He wrote anything that anyone would pay him for.
Mm-hmm.
So before his first Western came out, and it before his first Western was accepted in 1968, he was 39 years old. It was just before his 40th birthday that his first book got accepted. He had been writing pornography books under an assumed name, or several assumed names. And so he didn't share anything.
Right. Sharing that around the table.
And what he did, I mean, he'd share things like, oh, did you know that in 1860 somethings, this person created the repeating rifle? I mean, that's wrong. I know it's wrong. Don't at me at that. But he would share things that he found out that were historically interesting, and usually over the dinner table, you know.
Yeah.
But no, he didn't talk about word count. And the only time he was really excited was when he was already producing a lot of work. He had an editor call him panicked because the guy that was supposed to have a novel ready that was going to go to print in a week didn't
have it ready. Yeah.
And so the editor said, here, can you make a novel out of this idea? And my dad wrote a 50,000 word novel in 6.5 days.
Oof.
On a manual typewriter.
Oh
no, I'm sorry, electric. Selectric 3 was out then, and it had a memory. And it had a memory of 9 pages, so all his chapters were 9 pages long.
That's all of that amazes me. Every time I think about it, I couldn't do it. I would, because I'm typo guy, like, and I need to restructure this entire paragraph on a whim. Like, I am that guy. So I that freaks me out. Like the idea, I mean, the pressure. So you grew up, so there's 5 of you, and your father is this writer. And so obviously you and Scott got the writing bug. Are any of the other siblings into writing as well?
Yeah. My brother, Greg, he writes under a pseudonym. He started writing about 6 years ago and publishes his own stuff.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
So when you're growing up, you've got this, writer father, you've got, you're in Southern California, and life is just, it was a very unique time to be in place to be growing up. And you have suddenly this, like, your brother starts getting into, I don't know, some weird stuff, some different stuff. Were you aware that Scott was practicing the magics? Or was that something that he kind of kept to himself until later on?
Well, he never came out and said, I'm into witchcraft. He never did that. It was more like, hey, come here. I want to test something out on you, And so, and I've said this before, it didn't dawn on me until I was doing these interviews that we were learning side by side. He was learning by teaching me, and I was learning from him. So it was, in that way, it was very fascinating. And, I mean, I never knew he was creating incenses in his bedroom, but at night I could smell them because our bedrooms were right next to each other, and we had windows facing the same way. So we'd go out one window and in my window. It was just something that was always there. It was kind of like growing things. My dad comes from a family of farmers, so growing things was something that was always there. It was just
was the thing. It was something y'all picked up. So was it like, so you're living in this, because I remember like making incenses in my room and my sister smelling it, and like I remember all of this stuff. So I'm just transported back to my own childhood. And one of the things that I mean, I grew up in an environment that was particularly spiritually interesting. We'll just put it that way. It's a lot of my parents were not happy with the witchcraft until I was out of the house, and they're still not happy with it. I mean, I'm sure my mother would still prefer me to go be a minister or something, but here we are today. But there was like a resistance there. Was there any resistance from your family about it, or was it just, oh, Scott's doing Scott's weird stuff?
No to either one of them.
Oh, I love that.
The Cunninghams, my branch of the Cunninghams anyway, were devout Methodists. We had been for generations. And when I look back to me, the Methodist Church is family and potlucks and taking care of everybody else's kids and, that kind of thing. And my brother actually sang in the choir with my mom for years. First in the youth choir, and then he transferred to the adult choir. I think partially just to keep an eye on her, but also because he enjoyed singing and he knew it made her happy. So he sang in the choir until I think he was 19 or maybe 20, until she could no longer sing. When she realized that her eyes couldn't tell her brain what her mouth was supposed to say, looking at the hymnal, that's when she realized she needed to stop singing.
Yeah.
So he stopped right around the same time. But no, it wasn't. It was very much a live and let live kind of atmosphere. Both my parents were college graduates. My mom had a bachelor's in psychology, and they were not going to push us to do anything because they didn't want us to rebel and do something worse,
Right.
than we were already
Smart
doing.
parents. Yeah. Smart parents.
Yeah, they
Absolutely.
really were, looking back on it. So it was just kind of, and of course, once Scott started writing the books and making the money, not that he was making a lot, but he was writing and publishing, and then, they didn't care. I mean, I don't think they ever really cared. Maybe in private conversation, they were concerned, but I never saw it. And I don't think Scott ever saw it.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. I really love that. And one of the things my partner Chaz says is because he was raised Methodist. And so he was like, no, it was very different than like what a lot of times we think of churches being in church communities being. It's like, it was really more political. It was really more about it was more like a union meeting than it was anything else. And helping people take care of each other's kids and resource sharing and things like that. And it was like, I think it's a really beautiful thing. So so I'm thinking again, writing, and I'm thinking of myself as somebody who has been through the awkward situation of writing about his spirituality and putting it out there for the world to see. I cannot, there wasn't really anybody doing it at the time that Scott decided he was going to take this leap. I mean, there were, but it was all very periphery, and the community didn't exist the way that it does now, and things were very different. So Scott had to have been in this place where he had some guts. He had some sort of chutzpah that said, you know what, I'm going to talk about this really weird thing. That's because it's your spirituality. It's just weird. Doesn't matter. You're going to write about your spirituality. It's a very weird experience. Yeah. So he's going to go do this. And there wasn't the history of occult authors and witchcraft authors. Like, I'm lucky. I consider Scott one of my ancestors as a author, especially for Llewellyn and, a gay man and all of these things. He's a freaking ancestor of mine. But I can't imagine standing at the precipice of this path and not having a bunch of ancestors behind me, right? So do you know about when he decided to start writing and to specifically about the occult and take that leap? Was that something that was there a personal conviction to make that happen? Or was it just something that he was like, all right, well, I'm going to try it and see if it works? And where was his head at with that?
I'd love to know. But I can tell you that he was very interested in getting the knowledge that he had out to the people who didn't have the opportunity to learn it any other way. He shopped that first book, Magical Herbalism. He shopped that to every major publishing house in the country. And everybody liked it. Nobody could figure out how to market it. Nobody was willing to take a chance on it until he finally approached Llewellyn. And they said, sure, we'll take it. But he worked hard for that book before it ever found a home. And I think part of it is because he had people around him. Eventually, I mean, it took a time, it took time. He was learning this stuff when he was 13, 14, 15. And he found the people around him that could support him and teach him and train him. And he knew not everybody had that. So sharing what he knew was a way to help other people. And I think that was true of everything he wrote. He wrote to inform, to support, and to really help people who had no other way of learning this stuff. You know, libraries carried his books, and I can't imagine how many people found him through the library. So,
Yeah, I know. We actually had a mission of getting as many of his books as we could and taking them to libraries and dropping them off at one point, because they're so accessible. And like that's the whole thing that we tell everybody from day one. Like for the last 20 years, we've been saying, oh, you like the easiest access point really is Scott Cunningham's book, really are Scott Cunningham's books, because there's a lot of pretense that's just gone. Like that's not what he's there to share information, and it's really nice. Yeah. So he decides he's going to start writing about the craft, and he's going to start sharing this information, which we're all very glad that he has done. I remember reading Whispers of the Moon many years ago, which is it's a biography-ish of him and stages of his life.
yeah.
And one of the things that I found interesting was that he lived with some magical people too. Like he had some other authors that were his roommates, and there were some really fun stories in that book about like him bringing straw home to make corn dolls or something like that, and the bathroom being flooded with moths. Like I remember this; it sticks with me. Were you around for any of that? Like him meeting magical people, and were you introduced to any of his friends at that stage in his life?
No.
Okay.
No.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, we moved in together just after I turned 18. We got an apartment together on Orange Avenue, and the apartment doesn't exist anymore. It's been torn down. But Scott was a really private person.
Mm-hmm.
So if he knew you from high school, but didn't know you from the magical circles he walked in,
Mm-hmm.
was in, the two
Mm-hmm.
didn't meet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, his writer friends didn't meet his magical friends unless they were the same people.
Mm-hmm.
He had about 3 years after I moved out. 2020. In 2020, February 29th, 2020. Oh my goodness, his name just flew my head. Donald Michael Craig.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he moved in, and they were roommates for about 6 years, and I never got to meet Don.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
So it was an interesting time, because while he was writing a lot and building up his cred and learning. I was up in LA trying to survive.
Yeah.
And admittedly, he was trying to survive too, to keep the lights on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we would write each other every now and then, and usually my cards would include a check for $25 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
We would never call each other, because we grew up in a time where a 5-minute phone call to like Oregon would cost you $10, and $10 was a lot of money at that time, So it was, it was. No, I didn't get to meet his friends.
Yeah. And that's what I assumed, because I feel like, I mean, this is just for everybody. Like we go, I know with my sister, we were super close, but you get older, you just go live your own lives, you do your own thing. And during those years, we develop a lot. And my sense has always been that he went and figured himself out and figured his stuff out, and was doing that. And my question had always been how informed were you as his family? How involved were you? And but I always assumed not terribly, because he was doing his own thing. He's a grown man doing his own thing.
Right.
So speaking of being a grown man doing his own thing, one of the things that I know has been kind of a weird topic is what he was getting up to when he was not practicing witchcraft and was looking for company. And there have been rumors, there have been all kinds of stories, there have been a lot of speculation. And, you know, one of the things that I knew from early on, like I think one of my first witchcraft teachers, one of the reasons they recommended Scott was they're like, oh, you have a lot in common. And I didn't know what that meant until later on in life. And then I went, oh, that was cheeky. But yeah, so Scott was at the very least what we just from the public know. He was bisexual or pansexual or something along those lines. He definitely was a queer person. And growing up and being a queer person at the age and the time that he was could not have been easy for anybody. And I again, you know, we know he had a private life, and we don't want to pry his private life open. That it's not what this is about. But definitely, were you aware of any of that? Were you aware of who he was in that regard, or was that something that was kept private?
Well, it was kept private,
Mhm.
absolutely. But and yeah, even if we wanted to go into his wild and crazy personal life, I have nothing to share. I don't know anything about it. But he, I was in a ballet company. Well, I was taking ballet 6 days a week at California Ballet Company. And there were men there in the company and boys and teenagers taking ballet there. So I was not a stranger to gay men. And I think I put it in the book that, you know, when you're a teenage girl or a teenage boy for that matter, running around in almost nothing, tights and leotards, which was very thin barrier between your skin and the rest of the world, it's important to know who you're safe with. And I knew that there were some boys who liked the boys and there were some boys that liked the girls. And oftentimes the boys that liked the boys were safer for a girl like me to be with. So I learned very quickly that gay men existed and who I could trust in the company. And when it slowly dawned on me from 13 to 15, I think, I realized, oh, Scott's like this guy over here. Okay, I get that. Okay, great. You know, it didn't, it wasn't a bad thing in my viewpoint, because I knew so many gay men that, does that make sense? It's
yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that I hear as a dancer. That's one of the things that is talked about very early on, are because we do have those relationships, and obviously gay men and women who we share something there, right? And it goes beyond what we're attracted to. It has to do more with how we're treated and how we treat each other and things like that. So I think that 1000% makes sense. So obviously, so you're like, okay, Scott's like this guy over here in the leotard, and that's okay. And I love that. I absolutely love that. It's hard to talk about. I want to keep it all light and airy, because he's such a beautiful person. He did all this great work, but there are things and elements to the story that are heart-wrenching. They're heartbreaking. There's Scott getting sick and what that was like. And, you know, specifically, we're talking about AIDS. We're talking about a disease that was under responded to, especially during the time. It was something that was kept secret, and it was made shameful. And Scott ends up finding himself in a situation where he's contracted HIV, and it turned into AIDS. And that's something that it changed the world. It changed the magical world. It had to have changed your world, because you are his sister. how was this processed? How did he tell you this, or was that even information that you were? I mean, I've read the book. I'm trying to like get around certain really awesome things in the book, like this. His birth charts in here, people. Like it's a really good book. But like, were you part? Like, how did that all kind of unfold? Because that had to have been one of the hardest things that he went through, I would imagine, as a gay man, and knowing what that was like for so many people. That had to have been hard for him.
Oh, I'm sure it was. In 1983, when the news of AIDS first broke, I was here in LA. My husband's an actor. We were doing musicals. We had been doing musicals. We had been doing Shakespeare. We had been doing theater for a while, both in San Diego and up in LA. And within the span of a month, maybe 2, maybe 3, I don't really remember at this point, we lost 50 people to AIDS in the theater community that I was in. And not to mention all the losses that were happened in New York and across the country. And when you lose that many people that quickly, you get angry. You just get angry. It was hard. It was very hard. And I didn't correlate that to Scott at all. I was like, well, I hope he's careful. But I didn't really make the correlation between Scott's gay and Scott is going to get AIDS or might get AIDS. So what happened was he had decided to become celibate for whatever reason. I don't know whether it was a broken heart or what, but he had decided to become celibate in 81 and didn't date after that. So when he collapsed in Massachusetts, and when they told my dad on the phone that he had fungal meningitis, you don't get fungal meningitis unless you're in the jungles somewhere.
Right.
You know, you just don't. And so, and they had to explain that he's immune deficient and he's got AIDS basically. And that was really hard. It was very hard to hear. But, it had been 10 years since all those people had died. And I was just like crossing my fingers and hoping that they would come up with the right drug at the right time and everything would be fine, because every other time he got sick, everything was fine.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't imagine that it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
when they did come out with the cocktails that started working, it was too late for him.
Yeah.
The disease had progressed too far. So
yeah. That is something that, I mean, and thank you for sharing with us that personal side of things, because that is something that, unless you are part of the gay community or you happen to live close to an area that was really hit by it, a lot of people aren't aware of just how quickly it changed the face of the planet. I mean, it just did. So many people were lost, and it was a tidal wave, and people just got caught up in it, and there was no escape from that happening. Do you know, how was his spirituality affected by him being aware that he was sick and, towards the end of his life? Where was he at with that?
I don't know. I wish I did. I know that he would have done what he did when he had cancer, and that is he would have done the visualization and the armies of the good guys coming in to defeat the bad guys. And I don't even know if he had relationship with specific gods and goddesses. I don't know. And he doesn't really talk about his personal spirituality in the books. So I have to say, I believe that he was all in till the very end. I don't think he would have given up.
Yeah.
You know, he worked so hard to get the books written that he could still write, because he was running out of time and he knew it, and he hated that. He had so much more to talk about, and I was just glad he got the Hawaii book done before he passed away.
Yeah.
That was major, but he had other things in the works too that were partially done or in edits. I'm not entirely sure, but there is a couple things that came out after he passed away. I know the Hawaii book was one of them. But yeah, I can't imagine he would have given up.
The sense, just from reading his work, and you know, the stories and things from people around him, it was really that he knew who he was and he knew what his path was, and there wasn't going to be faltering of that. Like he had whatever he needed to turn that light switch on, and that was what was illuminating him, and there wasn't going to be a question to that. And that has always been something that I strive for. I strive for that level of confidence in my life and in my life path. I mean, you know, just seriously. And that's what I'm saying. You know, there wasn't anybody doing it before him, so he was a trailblazer. That is literally the perfect term for him. It's in the subtitle. But you know, yeah, he really truly was. And so the thing that always gets me going with Scott is that he had such a huge, profound effect, and he had no idea that he was. How could he? You know, how could any of us know those things? Yeah. How do you know, after the fact, how do you find yourself connecting with Scott these days? Like, do you sit down with one of his books and read? Do you go through photo albums, or, you know, what's it like for you to have a relationship with Scott now? Because things are a little different.
I talk to him. I talk to him all the time now. I started talking to him when I was writing the book, and I talk to him whenever I have a fire outside. I talk to him when I'm watering or dealing with the garden. We get into arguments every now and then. Usually he's telling me I'm being silly to get over myself, and we carry on from there. But yeah, I never toss a bunch of photographs after everybody's gone until they've been gone for 5 years. Wait. That's all I'm going to say. Just wait. Don't be rash.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the photographs I had, I don't have anymore. And I'm not quite sure why. There's a little gray cloud over that part of my life. So, yeah. So his books, definitely. Anytime I need to hear him and he's not answering me when I talk to him, I'll go to his books.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So what was this like for you? So you're a sister, you've got a very specific connection to him, and you're also aware over time, obviously, that he has had this impact on a community, and that there are these people who really he means a lot to. How did this book get started? Like, because obviously you're a writer, you know how to write. You're very familiar with that. Your family is a family of writers. But what made you want to dive into this topic? What made you want to talk about Scott versus writing about the things that usually you're writing about?
I didn't want to. I sincerely did not want to. I didn't expect to. I was at a pagan conference, the Phoenix Fire conference gathering in Florida in the fall of 2018, and I did a workshop. I did a couple of workshops, but one was about Scott, and I showed his kitchen witch that my grandmother Hazel had made him, and I showed some of his fiction books, and talked about the guy I grew up with. And before I had that talk, I had people coming up and hugging me just because I was Scott's sister, which was an interesting thing that never happened before. And afterwards, I had people coming up and hugging me and saying, thank you for sharing about the person behind the books. Thank you. And then later on, it became, you're going to write a book about him, right? And that happened probably 50 times over the rest of the weekend. And I was like, oh, well, I hadn't planned on it, but I guess I will. And the idea sort of circled around in the back of my brain. And it was a hard year, fiction-wise. 2018 was for me. Did not, ended up really burning out toward the end of it. And so I turned to the book about Scott as a way to, as kind of an antidote to fiction, because this was real life. This is something I knew I could do. This is my life. I didn't need research books, to figure out how to, whatever. I couldn't have anyone tell me I'm wrong and I shouldn't write my characters that way, because this is my family. This really happened. And so I started that at the end of 2018.
Yeah. I told you at Newt's that, like, you have, just because Scott Cunningham is your brother, you are automatically like protected. Like all of the witches in the world, like you're just automatically, nope, you're in the mafia now. It's like you're part of the family. Like you will be safe. Like it's not gonna be a problem. You know what I mean? Like you just got to make a call. Like it's literally you are in that place because we take care of our own, we always did, we always have.
Yeah.
So I'm finding myself just getting emotional over that. I mean, how we can't, get a little emotional over the topic. It's so hard to talk about somebody who had an impact on our lives and is no longer here, to continue creating that impact in new ways. While you were writing this, did you find that there were moments that were just things that were hard for you to plow through, or hard for you to sit down with and hold space for?
Yeah. Almost all of it.
Yeah.
This was not a, I can do this in 6 weeks type of project. This took me almost 4 years.
Yeah.
I'd write a section. I'd sit down and say, okay, what's my topic today? What can I pluck out of our shared past and write about today? And I'd put the title of it on top of the page, and I'd start writing. And once I was done, I was done. So even the most emotional parts came fairly easy and fairly, I cried through the whole thing, but that's to be expected. The really difficult, the one really difficult section that I did have to pull out maps and did have to do some brain work and did have to talk to my brother Greg about was the epic vacation. Because I had to go, okay, we started in San Diego. Which states did we miss? Which states did we just drive through? Which states did we stay in? That was, anytime I get a little foggy, that's because my memory is just gone.
I mean, also it was like 30 years ago. I mean, just give yourself a little bit of a,
I was 9 on the epic vacation.
Oh yeah, oh, that's right. No,
that was a long
geez, yeah, no, it was even more so. So give yourself a little bit. You were 9 years old. Like your brain was still forming. It's okay. Yeah. I loved reading it. So I mean, biographies, those are always like a whole interesting, either you love that type of writing or you don't.
Yeah.
Biographies are easier to get through than autobiographies, but it's something that I found myself obsessed with. Like I think I read the entire book within a day. Like I just sat down and just went through it, and because it was putting pieces together and filling in gaps in my awareness of who Scott was. And again, ancestor, right? So it was, in a way, in its own way, it was reading this book was some devotional work. It was really great. Is there something that, like, what do you want people? Because you have this beautiful, I'm going to read it real quick. You have this really beautiful, let me find it. It's the dedication. And I'm just going to read the dedication because I loved it. It says, "To everyone who found a home within the pages of Scott's books, this one is for you." And I love that. I love it because I feel like you're helping us connect and connect with him, and after the fact, after we thought we would never be able to connect with him again, we have found this new layer, and so much of us are excited. What do you want us as the readers to walk away with from reading this book?
Ooh, a lot of things, actually. You can always do the thing you think you. Now that's just, wish we could edit that part out. Okay, first, Scott was all about kindness, respect, and dignity. Everyone deserved those three things. And I kind of like to add, until they show you they don't deserve them. But even then, they'd still deserve kindness, respect, and dignity. And if that's all you walk away from the book with, that's everything. Seriously. But also, I want you to understand that magic is for everyone. There is no barrier. It doesn't matter what color you are, what your abilities are, if you're disabled in any way. It doesn't matter. Magic is for everyone, and you can do it. And it doesn't matter. You do not have to start playing with magic, and I use that word deliberately, when you're 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 12. You can do it at 55. Okay. There's no age limit to start. And as wonderful as being in an in-person coven may be, I don't know, never been in one. I live in Los Angeles. You'd think I could find a freaking company. I can't. You don't have to. And the good thing about right now is there are enough online communities that you still get that communal support. But you can do everything on your own. And the oldsters that say, oh, all these self-proclaimed self-initiated witches, well, excuse me, go ahead and make covens open for everybody. And make them easy to find. And then there's also, if you do find a coven, what if you're not a good fit? What if it's you going into a group of people that you might not be safe with?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has always been a problem with in-person covens, though. Is that safety factor. So love some of the people that have been in magic and witchcraft for 30, 40, 50 years, but my God, people, lighten up.
Yeah, well, I'm into that. Yeah, I'd say that too. Like, we're all allowed to have access to spirit. Do you think Scott would have been? I've always wondered this, so I'm just gonna kind of an aside here. Do you think Scott would have adapted to the internet, or do you think he would have been like anti-internet?
Oh, he would have been an early adopter.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. He was on what do they call those? Internet boards? What were they?
Message board, the VBS boards, or
he was on VBS boards. One of the people in the book actually talks about how she had found this bulletin board, and it was very safe, and they were talking witchcrafty stuff, and somebody had some argument arose, and so someone brought Scott in to answer the question, to solve the argument, and he just sort of stayed. And so he got my dad's TRS-80. Once my dad upgraded to a newer computer, Scott got the old one,
Mhm.
and he would have been right there.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have gone into witch talk. He's a little too old for that.
Yeah.
But he would have been right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that vibe from him. Yeah, I feel like he and I would have like I if I had gotten to a chance to meet him, I feel like I would have just probably just been like starstruck the whole time. But honestly, I feel like he and I really probably do have a lot in common, and we probably would have had like loads of things to talk about. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I always like as I do my ancestor work and as I sit with him, um, I've always gotten this feeling like he would have used the internet in a very big way. Like he would have adopted it to get the word out in a way that a lot of us wouldn't have been able to. And so he liked it. Weird note, my own personal doses. This is kind of, yeah, well, but he very much enjoys the getting the word out stuff. So I assumed he would be good with the internet.
Yeah.
Uh, so a lot of people don't know that Scott wrote fiction, and it wasn't all just herbs and crystals and stuff. And he wrote some interesting fiction. And I when I found out that Scott was writing in the adult world, I lost it. I was like, well, what? So you come from the family of writers. Your father's just getting the gigs to pay the bills and do the stuff. And I know as a writer, I'll write anything if you're going to pay me. I'll totally do it.
Yeah.
So I get that we want to do that. Did you ever talk to him about writing that stuff? Was it ever just like how did? I guess my question is like, did you know he was writing that as well on the side, or was that something that okay?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. He actually got published first in fiction, and my dad had too many. He signed too many contracts with too many different publishers, and he had one with Carousel, and he said to Carousel, "Would you? I don't have time to write this book. Would you mind if my son wrote it?" And they said, "Well, we'll take a look at it. We can't promise anything." And Scott wrote the book and they ended up buying it. So he had several books with Carousel, mostly men's action series, Westerns, things that my dad was writing as well. And he had one Gothic romance that he wrote, I believe, under Kathy Cunningham, which my dad also wrote under. And so yeah, there were a lot of books that would not be considered, okay in this environment, today's environment.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. And that's something that the publishing is dealing with in a big way right now, just in general. So is there a fiction book that he wrote that you would recommend just because it's a piece of him that maybe we wouldn't otherwise have revealed?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
I was like, I know I asked the tough weird questions. I know everyone says like I was not prepared for it. Yeah, no, I know. I was just wondering because I'm trying to build up my TBR list over here. So yeah, I very much imagine writing action stories in the 80s was a very different experience than it is now.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Because we were still, yeah.
He'd go to my dad's house in the mornings and write with my dad, because they had taken the wall between my dad's den and my brother's bedroom. They'd taken that wall down. So it was one huge room. So there were two desks in there, and there was a couch, and there was lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of books. And so he would write his fiction during the day with my dad, and then go home and write his nonfiction at home.
I love that.
Yeah.
Was there a favorite story of his when he was a kid?
Favorite story? I don't know. My mother used to tell us stories. Now, by the time I came around, Scott was 4 years older than me, so he had graduated out of the storytelling by the time I was 3, 4, 5. So maybe some of the stories she told them were some of his favorites. I really couldn't tell you.
Yeah, no, these are all questions that I know if somebody asked my sister, she'd be like, I don't know. Totally. No, I have this image of him as this storyteller, and I'm very curious. But of course, I'm working on fiction stuff too, and I'm always interested in the lives of, for sure. So this book is about to drop. I mean, it's technically out in the world. It's out. But your release party online event is happening the next couple of days. Can we talk about that real quick?
Absolutely.
What's going on? What's going on with this book release stuff?
Well, I wanted a book release party, but a lot of my friends are not local. So, and a lot of none of the contributors are local. So I thought I'm going to borrow a trick of the trade from the romance industry and have an online book release party. And after a lot of hemming and hawing, I decided to go with Instagram Live, so we can record that, and I'll have people pop in. It's going to be so much fun. We're going to be talking about the Scott book. We're going to be talking about what the other person is doing in their lives, so they can push themselves a little bit, and we can push the book, and we can just have a really good time. I don't have the agenda in front of me, but Nicholas Pearson is my first person on Friday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. So again, I'll be Instagram Live, and I'm at Ashworth Christine on Instagram. And so 6:30 to 7:38ish on Friday, and then 10:30 to 11:30, 12ish on Saturday.
Yeah, excellent. So you have plenty of things to be doing this weekend, people. You should definitely go check out Christine's Instagram. Again, the book is Scott Cunningham, The Path Taken, Honoring the Life and Legacy of a Wiccan Trailblazer. And Scott absolutely was. And again, thank you so much for this, because it's for, I don't know. I don't know if it's because I'm in my mid 30s and I've been reading his books since I was for over 20 years. And so, things like that. And so I have this love, of course, for Scott. But I know everyone does. I don't know one person who has something bad to say about Scott. I really don't. And thank you for this. Thank you for giving us just another piece of him when we thought we weren't going to get anything else. It means the world to us. It really, truly does. Thank you for writing it. So if we want to find you, if we want to find other works and things by you, where do we send people?
Probably Amazon is the best. But you can also go to my romance website, which is Christine-Ashworth.com. Or I'm just revving up another website called mysticalmagic.me. That's more on the metaphysical side.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I wish you the best of luck with this. I cannot wait to just hear more about what people are saying and their experiences with it. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to write this. We really needed it, and it's appreciated.
Thank you. Love you, Devin.
Right. I love you too, Christine. We will talk soon. Everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.